you'll get a pretty good view from the satellite. Same thing can happen when you're listening to our podcast. Practitioners with thorough knowledge, internationally recognized experts together with passionate specialists can take you to new heights. Our aim is to make you ask the right questions and be curious. Self-development is more of a lifelong learning than a sprint. This show is hosted by business journalist Siiri-Liiva. What are the advantages of a new self-managed organizational culture? How can giving more power to the employees improve company's performance? And what can be learned from organized chaos? This we are going to discuss today with Siiri-Mall Musten and Timm Urschinger. I am the host, Siiri-Liiva. Siiri-Mall Musten is the CEO and founder of a future work consulting startup ELEWUS and an impact investor based in Switzerland. She is a truly global citizen and has studied and worked in 8 different countries. She has also worked at a Big Four global consulting firm and held management positions at a global pharmaceutical company. She says she's following her purpose to accelerate human transformation and sustainable growth in businesses by designing future-fit leadership and organizational development experiences. Siiri is also a certified coach. Timm Urschinger is the co-founder of LIVEsciences, a radically self-organized company that walks the talk. Timm and his team are on a mission to unleash the potential of people through self-organization and new ways of working. This move was inspired by his experiences working on change programs, organizational design and execution, and consultancy for big corporations such as Roche Pharma, among others. Timm is also the co-founder of LIVEsciences, a venture capital firm investing in the medical devices industry. Timm is passionate about unleashing the potential of people in big corporations. Welcome to Satelliit. This time our podcast is once again held in English, as has become a tradition in this podcast. Let's start off with a simple but a personal question. When was the last time when you radically, 360 degrees, changed your views on something? And Siiri, let's start with you.
Wow, this one I really have to think about. Perhaps in my case, it was about 3 years ago when I took at least a 180-degree shift from being, working as a head of leadership development for a huge pharmaceutical company and just decided to jump out of that comfortable, safe system and started setting up my own company.
Okay, that's a very good example. Timm, when was the last time for you?
I think for me the last time has not been that long ago. It's actually with the pandemic and it's related to working from home and all these things because I got 2 little kids at home, so I never worked from home, like 0%. And obviously then last year, March, April, pandemic hit and so on, and 100% from home. And now I am tempted to say I don't want to go back to kind of working in office spaces almost, because it's actually good at home for several reasons. So that's the one part. And then also as a team, I was always advocating for we meet at least once a week, once a month in person as a team, which obviously didn't happen. And now we are almost not going back, or most of the folks don't want to go back to meeting physically as well. So that's been big shifts, and it's working better than I thought.
Yeah, I think this pandemic has brought that shift for many organizations and teams. Okay, moving on more towards the topic of today's podcast. For some time, or even for a long time, we've had this classical hierarchical organizational structures. And we have plenty of companies and organizations still based on that. What are the flaws of this kind of structure? Siiri?
Well, based on my experience, it's kind of limiting everyone's potential and their strengths and talents in a company, because especially in these big companies, even if you are working already on a management leadership level, you are still such a small element in a huge system, and the whole decision making is still going through levels of hierarchies. It's basically just slowing down the whole communication, decision making, It reduces generally people's creative thinking, because in the end you are still kind of responsible, reporting to the management level above you. And that unfortunately also, especially in bigger organizations, creates a lot of these kind of political games and who is talking to whom, and at the same time reducing the potential that each and everyone has in a company.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you mentioned briefly a large pharmaceutical company you used to work for. How many employees did they have?
So about 50,000 globally.
Okay, that's a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, Tim, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think there's one thing, if you think about why do we have these hierarchical structures and where are they coming from? The second half of the 19th century, which means, for example, literacy level completely different, right? And if we think about Estonia also, where we both work in Switzerland, literacy level is close to 100%, of course, right? So there's a totally different need for management probably also compared to 19th century. So, and there's different challenges, complex world. I mean, there's also increasing dynamic there. So there's just so many things where the system's not been built for. And we are still answering questions that we have today with that system that's almost 150 years old. So kind of naturally, it's not necessarily fit for today's purposes. And then I agree with Siiri that it's all of these things. And I think what we are looking mainly for in our European countries is innovation. And innovation is not coming from hierarchical systems.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so basically we are working at on 21st century and we are using 19th century models.
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Now I'm turning this question around. Why in this kind of situation the organizations should change? Tim, maybe we continue with you.
Sure. Well, I think for exactly these reasons, if you want innovation, if you want to kind of react to the outside world that we're having, the complexity is increasing, which means in a complex world or in complex systems, you cannot predict what's going to happen. And we saw it with the pandemic. We're seeing it all over the place with all sorts of things. So if you can't reply to something unplannable in that sense, hierarchical systems just don't make sense in that case. And that's why we should rethink these kind of systems. Plus, I mean, I've been working in another big pharmaceutical company, twice as big as the one that Siiri worked for, so 100,000 people there. Okay. And obviously all of these big companies, also way, way smaller companies, by the way, there's a huge bureaucratic kind of system built around all of these processes. And I mean, obviously it's also costing a lot of money and time and resource. So if you think about all the resource you're wasting, kind of for me personally, for example, before this company I was working for another consultancy in 2015, so I had a relatively big team and all that, and I was signing off more than 1,000 expense sheets in just 1 year, right, as a highly paid management personnel. So 1,000 expense sheets signed off. Value for the company, you can argue, is probably close to zero. Value for me and interest for me is definitely zero, you know. So that's the time wasted, basically.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, Siiri.
Tim just reminded me also these kind of times, you know, when you had to complete all these Excel databases and doing a lot of work, which honestly saying I had struggled doing it because it was extremely boring. And at the same time, you would also ask, does it now provide value to the company, to our customers? And the answer is likely no, but things are getting done because just the processes work like this. And that's maybe also the main thing what happens in a hierarchical organization, that even if you want to ask a question or you want to change something, then the typical answer you get is just that, well, this is how things are done here. And yeah, people are just not so open. And I see this is exactly one of the main shift in the more network-based or self-managed companies, because there it's actually expected that each and everyone in their role would constantly listen and adjust to the internal and external environment, can anticipate trends. And so the whole drive in terms of innovation is no longer in silos in some kind of R&D department, but it's really naturally part of every role. And that also makes, of course, the work exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And the funny thing is, if you think about how startups work today, startups highly innovative, of course, none of them is spending or wasting their time in admin processes. Right? They're always focusing on product as much as they can, up to a certain extent. When they kind of get into the scale-up phase, and typical venture capital comes in, and you create management layers and stuff. But before that, it's always focused on the product, on the customer, on innovation. And as soon as you grow, it gets more difficult, more bureaucratic, and you lose part of the innovation. And also, if you look at what happens to startups if they get bought by big corporations, usually innovation is gone within 2 to 3 years. And that's exactly the reason for it.
Yeah, but the innovation is the reason why they're bought in the first place, which is like really controversial in that sense. Okay, Siiri, you already mentioned some alternatives. Let's talk about the alternatives.
Right. So, in principle, there are a couple of, let's say, more or less developed self-managed models out there, such as perhaps holacracy and sociocracy are the most common ones. But even there, I mean, as these are such new models, I, for example, typically wouldn't recommend to my clients to just go and adopt one specific model, but it's really about experimenting with self-managed teams and really figuring out what works for your specific company, what is the purpose, how is the culture, how are people, because even though but I also know, for example, from neuroscience or neuroleadership, that everyone, it's part of our basic human needs. We love autonomy. We love to be, in charge of what we do and becoming masters at what we do. So that becomes possible. But for example, in holacracy, the thing is that even if there is a clear structure, then sometimes these rules of the games will start dominating. So, for example, there are very fixed rules how you should run your meetings, and then sometimes maybe this kind of human creative part may get lost there. But I'm curious about Timm's, because Timm's company is also not exactly running a holacracy, but you also found your way, right?
True. Yeah, so we've also started off exploring holacracy some 6 years back, then looked into sociocratic systems, obviously got inspired by reinventing organizations from Frederic Laloux with the whole teal idea or concept maybe, because it's not really a framework anyway. And for us as well, holacracy was just too rigid, I guess, because I'm freedom loving.
Okay, Siiri brought out some like I can't call them problems, but some characteristics of, but maybe you can, like in greater detail, explain this type of culture.
I think the most important one is what you said before in the beginning is we didn't build hierarchies, and all of these systems don't build hierarchies based on whatever formal structures. You always obviously have leadership in these systems. That's true for any human system with more than 2 people. There's always leadership involved there, but not formal by structure or anything. So we're creating a role-based working system, which means I'm not having like one job title, like a one-to-one relationship. It's more one-to-n. So more than one role that I'm filling at any point in time. So that's one thing. I think the other is that we are looking for trying to build a more human workplace in many ways. So, I mean, if your dog just died or something, then it's likely that you're not happy and not at your best also for business. That's part of the game, right? Or if your kids didn't sleep, so I can relate to that a little bit, then there's just these things as well. And
so moving towards soulful organizations.
Totally, exactly. So that's what Frederick would probably call it. And then there's the other part, which I find really important, is if you think about, we're always talking about lifelong learning and also adaptive organizations. Right? And I think one of the key concepts that you find in sociocracy and also in holacracy is tension-based development. So instead of reorganizing, restructuring your company every 2 to 3 years, typical cycles in big companies at least, you would go tension-based, which means for us, for example, we have a monthly meeting similar to the holacracy governance meeting where we look at, well, are there any tensions? Is there anything that we are missing? Anything that's not working well? Any waste that we have, maybe talking about bureaucracy, right? And we adjust it on a monthly basis. So instead of 2 to 3 year cycle, we're doing that on a monthly basis. So assumingly, or maybe a bit simplified, you're like 20 to 30 times quicker than many of the big companies. And that's part of the culture as well. How can you be adaptive and just try out things? I mean, I've been doing consultancy work for a long time. Most of the team did not. And they try out things that I think, I've done that, seen that, doesn't work. And at the end of the day, it still works. which is surprising and a good reason for not having a top-down hierarchy, because I would have said no probably to some of these things.
Yeah, that's interesting that in a certain context, certain things don't work, but in a different context, they work miraculously.
Exactly.
Okay, we will come back to your company. So let's a little bit dwell on this topic. How well have been these new organizational models been received?
Yeah, I have to say, based on my experience, it's still mostly the small, medium-sized companies whose leadership is much more open to these kind of roles. Because, yeah, again, try to turn around a company with 100,000 employees globally. So yes, I think worldwide they say there are like a couple of thousand companies officially running on holacracy.
Okay, a couple of thousand.
But mostly, yeah, of course, these are the startups who start, having maybe 20, 30 people, and then at some point need to decide, okay, how are we going to structure ourselves? But based on my experience and what we also recently talked at the conference, it's really a lot about also top leadership own mindset. What do they believe in? Because in the end, it's a courageous question to them. Are you ready to give away your power, so to say, to trust your people, to empower your people? And yeah, some leaders are ready for that, some not.
When you say that globally, they say that there's a couple of thousand companies working on holacracy. Is there like any geographical concentration of this kind of companies, or is it all over the world?
I think it's mostly the holacracy company is mostly US-based, because holacracy was kind of developed in the US. Then if you look at Europe, obviously there's quite some as well. But if you look at the global distribution of self-managed organizations, then it's globally on all continents. And I don't know, we are also looking into Teal Around the World conference that we are running together, and we got speakers from all over the globe. It might not be holacracy or sociocracy, that's probably more the western part of the world, if you wish. But then in Japan, in China, there's big self-managed organizations as well, and you would find it really across the globe. And even in cultural areas where you and I probably here in Europe would say that's not necessarily the easiest foundation to start with, like a Chinese kind of political system that's probably not exactly self-managed, or a Japanese really traditional mindset in the society and kind of, really hierarchical type of thinking, and then obviously they're running self-managed companies as well.
Okay, that's actually for me also surprising to hear that, because you would think that if a society has like really strict rules how things are run, then they are much more reluctant to try different ways in their company cultures. But this is good to hear. Yes, Siiri.
I guess actually that many of Estonian technology startups or bigger companies likely also implement at least some kind of self-management. And for example, I heard the IT company ProExpert was here, one of the first companies to officially implement holacracy.
Oh, okay.
Because I think somehow we are also lucky here in terms of our working environment to have smaller companies, to have more freedom in what we do. But of course, now I have also been away from Estonia about 13 years, so
yes, and well, we can come back to that later. How the traditional companies here are making changes. But you already mentioned some things why the new organizational models are radically different. Is there something else you want to emphasize in self-managed structures?
I think there's one thing that's important also, same as for any big buzzword like agility, self-management, whatever, always is important to define what we're actually talking about, because also self-management is a fairly broad range of things that it could mean or does not mean actually.
Okay.
So that's maybe one thing to mention, and I think the other is that there's many kind of gray areas in between the black and white space, right? And there are, Siri yesterday talked about flatter keys as well, kind of flattening the hierarchical systems as well, and that could be helpful. If you look at lean management, for example, which is also 60, 70 years old now almost, there are certain elements that are fairly self-managed, and also from a leadership perspective, you can draw from these relatively old theories there. So it's not always you have to kind of turn everything upside down, black and white. I think there's also some good steps in between, and if you look at these, and I'm pretty sure for the bigger Estonian companies it's the same, you will likely have some steps in the right direction already.
Yes, my first thought when I was listening to you was also that it sounds a little bit like lean management model or system, or I don't know how to call it. Okay, Siiri, do you want to add?
I guess one element what is also radically different in self-managed companies is that mostly these companies have a well-defined purpose. So why does the company exist at the first place? And this is also something where we see a huge shift away from just being focused on generating as much profit or shareholder value as possible, but now the shift and question is really, what is the company's value to the wider society? How do we contribute to the environment? And normally, and what I already also hear among younger generation, that when they go for job interviews, I mean, they ask the company, why would I join? I mean, why do you actually exist at the first place? Why
I should
why
choose
should
you?
I join you? Exactly. And then indeed, because the self-managed companies work in such an entrepreneurial way, I mean, everyone is in a way like an entrepreneur or intrapreneur, when at least within a company, and there has to be some kind of truly attractive a purpose which really makes everyone enthusiastic, and so that people come to work on Monday morning with shining eyes and want to contribute.
Yeah. Okay, well, there is like a concept that you yourself use for turning the organizational cultures around. This is called future fit organizations. So what are the core principles of future fit organizations?
So indeed, we have already talked about two of those. So having a evolutionary or this kind of higher corporate purpose comes first. And then indeed a structure which is self-managed, or in other words, network-based. What we a little bit also touched upon, the third element, is that these companies are truly evolutionary in a sense that innovation happens every day, and there is no longer such a thing as change management. And finally comes also the stakeholder orientation. As I mentioned, it's no longer just about focusing on shareholders, but truly widely, what is my value to my employees, customers, other organizations, communities working on similar purpose, or even how do you co-create with your competitors?
Okay, Tim, do you want to add?
No, I think for the future fit organizations, there's a ton of frameworks out there. I think one of the kind of the concepts that I would say is mindset of abundance rather than scarcity, and that's what Siiri is also referring to. I mean, in a more traditional sense, both of our companies will probably be competitors in a way. Now we've been on stage at the Playday conference here in Pärnu, and now we are sitting in the same podcast. You know, we are collaborating more or less every day anyway. Just because we're driven by the same idea, by the same purpose. And I think that's definitely one of the differences in the mindset of abundance. Doesn't only talk about competitors, it also talks about how you look at the market, how you look at your products, how you look at innovation. And I think that's why that's some of the key concepts, really.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask the question that I have already asked from a different angle, because sometimes people need a different angle to understand why it would or could be useful for them, or what could they win from changing the organizational structure. What do the self-managed organizational structures enable organizations or businesses do better than what they are doing now?
So I would usually say the big difference is structures in self-managed teams are built to provide autonomy, and structures in traditional concepts are structures built to control.
Mm-hmm.
So now if we turn it around and say structures are built to provide autonomy, that basically means, I mean, pretty simplified, I can go on vacation for 3 weeks, although I'm one of the founders of the company, and nobody bothers me because they're all doing their job anyway. Pretty amazing from a leadership perspective, right? So, these are the things where I'm thinking, if you provide a structure for autonomy, you provide the direction still, because there's always the balance of alignment and autonomy, and a certain alignment you need as an organization, as a company. Otherwise you go in all sorts of different directions, and that structure helps you to create that alignment. And obviously also there's still that place of who's doing what, who's deciding what. How do we know that this is our strategy? How do we know that these are our objectives? All of these questions make sense if you look at it from, we're building that structure to provide autonomy, and don't bother Siri and everyone else every day with whatever management team meetings that don't provide value anyway. And this is, I think, the biggest difference in that sense.
Okay. Siiri, do you want to add?
Yeah, I think in simple words, it's a structure where everyone is encouraged to show up like who they are and at their best. Because again, if you compare back to the more hierarchical models where also, before COVID, everyone would kind of have their professional mask on. But yeah, the self-managed companies have a great level of, psychological safety. So you can speak up if there are tensions, even tensions are welcome, because this could also be a source of innovation. And when people operate in such an environment where they can just be themselves and bring in their best ideas, like this is also then exactly how innovation starts happening, how things are moving faster. It's kind of also a fail-forward approach, because you can do mistakes as long as you learn quickly and move on.
Okay. Yeah. But now I'm going to ask maybe to intrigue a little bit. A question that who might feel threatened by this kind of new organizational structures or models?
Typically threatened, if you look at traditional organizations, obviously middle management, maybe senior management as well, because that's the layers that are there to control mainly today, to manage people, and that's what you would say, we don't need that because they're smart enough anyway, they can do without you as long as you provide direction. So these guys feel threatened. And I guess also being part of a self-managed team makes you anxious to a certain extent, because there's more accountability on yourself, of course. Right? There's nobody that you can just go back to and say, can you tell me, should I go left or right? There's nobody that you can escalate to for the first tricky kind of decision maybe, right? So these are also things, but they're typically threatened, I would say, middle, senior management layers. Top management not so much, because these guys are usually working anyway on like the visionary big strategic things, and you need that anyway. And then kind of the layers below, team leads oftentimes, and also the teams themselves, they are looking forward to that freedom, because they want to be leveraged in a sense of their full potentials that they can bring.
Okay. Siiri, do you want to add something?
What I have also noticed that sometimes even, let's say, the employees are also super enthusiastic hearing about, our management is planning to turn the whole company around and we all will have so much freedom and creativity in what we do. But even then, if you now think this could be the people who in their own career for the last 10, 15, 20 years have worked in a hierarchical structure, it's actually also extremely difficult in the beginning, challenging, like Tim mentioned, to truly from one day being an employee, second day being suddenly an entrepreneur and being in charge of everything. So I think that's why it's always also recommended that at least in the beginning people would have coaches, or there would be some kind of self-leadership or self-management training as well offered.
Okay, so basically what they need to do, they need to change their mindset with this new organizational culture. Okay, but now we can move on to concrete examples and case studies and companies. And the first question I'm going to ask you is that, can you explain the listeners what kind of steps have you yourselves taken with your own companies to move towards 100% self-managed organizational model?
So I think I already mentioned role-based working. So one of the first steps we've taken is writing down roles and the accountabilities going with it and the decision authorities. We've done a typical consultant mistake in the beginning, which was like, what are the roles we might need in 2 to 3 years from now to make it work, kind of. Obviously the wrong question. The right question would have been, and we figured it out after half a year, like, what do we need right now to function? But yeah, it took us half a year in the beginning. Anyway, so we've written down the roles. And I think the other thing we've written down is what we call our lifeline. So it's kind of a constitution in the holacracy world. And it's basically principles, values, and everything underlying our collaboration. So kind of the more generic things in a way. Because of that, exactly that need for alignment still. So we're creating a lot of autonomy with the roles, and yet we want to kind of from an ethical perspective almost, or from a principle-based perspective, we want to act in a similar way. And that's written down in that document of principles and values in a sense. And I think the other thing that always is true is it takes time in the beginning to have these conversations. So what do we mean if we say trust? What do we mean if we say courage, transparency? You know, these typical buzzwords that we're all using, and all of us would say we like transparency. Okay, do you like transparency if your salary is transparent as well to all of your colleagues? You know, then it gets a bit more interesting conversations usually. And so we've taken a lot of time in the beginning to discuss some of these buzzwords really.
Okay, so you have to define them. You have to have a discussion around those concepts.
I think so, yes, exactly. And to be quite honest, some of these conversations come back. So we've been running the self-managed web for almost 6 years now. And I think I've discussed purpose, felt like 27 times, and I'm more on the efficiency side. So maybe a bit impatient, you know. So we've discussed our purpose 27 times almost because of the team dynamic changing. There's different constellations in the team. There's probably a purpose also slightly moving in a sense. So some of these conversations come back, and I think actually the conversations are more valuable than whatever 5 bullet points in a document that's defining the word.
Yeah, yes, and sometimes people need a reminder of where we're heading. Okay. When you said that you were putting down the roles and you also put down the guiding principles, isn't that a really bureaucratic thing to do?
Yes, in a way, I think so. And there's also that question of how granular do you put it down? And we are roughly 20 people, and we probably got like 15, 18 roles or something. So it's relatively lean in that sense. But we also have companies we work with where there's like 100 people in the team. They have 300 roles. Completely overdone, right? Completely bureaucratic mindset. So it's more like, again, guiding, directional type of roles. And the same is true for our principles. You can write a book about it. And our document is probably like 10, 12 pages, and that's good enough, really. And we've adjusted it over time as well. So I would say I would always go for writing down some things, especially if you're growing the company, because it's always kind of tribal knowledge in the heads of the people who are there the longest. But then again, a few things written down will help, because I can also refer back to it and say, Siri, look, we've said we want to act like this. And what I've observed is really something different. So if you haven't written it down, some of these kind of tensions or conversations get really difficult. So I think you also mentioned psychological safety before. So if we talk about big companies, there's usually not such a high level of psychological safety. And writing some things down, kind of stakes in the ground, helps to increase at least the trust that it's serious and it's credible, and not just some kind of, lipstick on a pig type of exercise.
Yes, and probably it's good for the people themselves as well to sometimes open this document and get support for I don't know, some things that they are struggling with or problems they need to tackle. Okay, Siiri, what kind of steps have you taken?
Yeah, in my case, I took a different path. At least it is something I have been experimenting over the last 3 years. And that means that I am operating through a network of companies. So I personally, or in my company ELEWUS, I don't have any employees. Because in my case, I just love so much the freedom of working in an entrepreneurial way that somehow I just can't employ someone. I don't know, from my heart, I just can't make anyone my employee. Maybe it's gonna totally change. And that means that I'm working closely with other similar purposed companies, just like Timm and LIVEsciences, even though in the beginning we also did discuss, should I be perhaps joining LIVEsciences? But I'm just realizing that as Timm mentioned, it's a world of abundance, and if you're really trying to make some bigger change happen in a business world or society, when you realize that all the other companies, similar organizations, they would rather co-create with you, and it really works this way. So in my case as well, it depends what kind of project I got in, what kind of transformation it is. If it's more organizational development work, then maybe I would contact Timm and LIVEsciences. If it happens to be more, let's say, leadership development, mindset shift, then I'm collaborating also with an American company called Leadership Management International. Or there are really, I think yesterday I said it in a conference as well, like these kind of new companies or movements on the topic of future of work are now really like popping up like mushrooms after the rain. And everyone is so open to collaborate. So this is how it has been working so far. I mean, a few smaller coaching projects I may do on my own, but it's really pulling in the best expertise for a specific client you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Is the focus on the future of work so big at the moment because of the pandemic? Or are there other reasons behind it?
I think it probably started before. I think the pandemic was an accelerator, most likely, because of the home office and kind of the need to work virtually and remote. And also from a leadership perspective, it was always like, if I don't see you in the office at your desk, you're not working. And obviously, if you had that mindset with pandemic, that was kind of difficult because people were working and obviously doing their work also from home. So pandemic accelerator, I would say we had it before that it was getting more and more and also kind of getting a topic because of innovation, because of the need for reacting to the outside world. Again, the world's getting more complex. So it's the more complexity you have, the less likely it is that your top-down decision-making will lead you to the best decisions as well. And there's also the part where what Siiri mentioned before, this whole ecosystem focus. So focusing not only on your company or your individual profit, but actually focusing on the benefit of the broader society around you as well was more important, and these hierarchical systems were just not built for that. So I think the pain was increasing, especially if you look at big companies, and since the pain is increasing, it was a topic. I would say if you look at what agility and these buzzwords are there, it's probably for the last 5-6 years when it really became mainstream.
Okay. Well, Timm, let's talk more about your company. I understand that it's designed 100% self-managed. Let's take some concrete aspects of your company's work. For example, how do self-set salaries work?
I think that's probably the things that are most shocking to most people. So we do have self-set salaries. Without criteria is defined, without a waiting list or something, right? It's just you can define your salary yourself, completely free range. There's also no levels or containers or whatever. It's just free range. How it works is pretty simple. I mean, in theory, pretty simple. In actual case, it's relatively tough for people, but
I can imagine.
But theoretically easy. So basically, you get advice, you get input from other people, what they think. In our case, in a Swiss franc figure. So you just get a Swiss franc figure, and then we do a bit of a speed dating round. It usually takes us like 2.5 hours, where you would tell me for 3-4 minutes why you put that figure, and I would do the same for you, and then we basically switch. So within 2 hours, you get input of 10 plus people, why they think this should be your salary. And then you got a bit of a thinking time, almost like let it sink in for another week or two. And then it's what we call announcement meeting. So I would basically just go there and say, I want to earn whatever, 100,000. Here you go. Right? And that's about it. So in theory, a really simple process. What happens in practice, obviously, is first of all, you put value, money value to value yourself. Kind of that's a difficult step. Then you also provide input to so many other people that you might not have worked directly with over the past year that much as well. And then there's also that part. I put down a number on a piece of paper and I'm happy with it. And then I see that you earn 5,000 more. And all of a sudden I'm unhappy with my number. Right? So that's kind of human, or at least Central European human kind of coded in behavior almost. And that makes it difficult as well because obviously it's all transparent. So we know what everyone earns and you know these kind of things. But yeah, theoretically simple process.
Okay. How often do you have this kind of salary negotiations?
Once a year.
Once a year.
Yeah. So we've just kicked it off again in end of October now. So it's kind of fresh at the moment. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting. Very interesting. But I think like usually when you're either changing companies or looking for a new job, then you also have to put the number on your work or on your value as well. And sometimes the number might be lower than the actual the actual bid is, but sometimes it might be much higher than the actual possibilities of a future employer can be.
Yeah, true. I mean, the big difference is the transparency.
Yes, I understand that.
If you come into a new team, just think about you're standing in front of the team and you meet them for the first time and you're telling them, by the way, this is what I'm earning. And if that feels comfortable, then you'll be fine with self-set salaries. And otherwise, you probably would also struggle to a certain extent.
Yes, in many contracts, there is also a clause salary being not to be disclosed to any other colleagues in the company. Yeah.
And these companies usually know why, because there's also legacy, there's a history, and people doing the same job might not earn the same, these kind of things. Yeah.
Yes, that's true. That's true, yes.
We actually never, Tim, talked much about it. So I'm also curious, isn't it still typical that, let's say, men are more self-confident and they would automatically put a higher number up there? And
so that's a good question.
Yeah.
Interesting enough, that's a question that comes up quite a lot. And I mean, obviously, I think that I'm the best because I'm male, right? So I don't have an issue with that. But seriously, I mean, we don't really have data, so we didn't properly research or anything. But looking at our salaries, and obviously all transparent, I think we don't have a gender gap that much. I think the other thing that has happened, probably if I'm thinking 3-4 years ago, we had a lady who was, I think, underrating herself a lot. So she put a number for herself, and she got 6-7 other numbers which were higher. So it made her think as well, and saying she underrated herself. If I get a lot of higher numbers, maybe I should still increase it a bit. And she was going like halfway. But I think that was still better than if she would have negotiated herself anyway in kind of a hierarchical system. So I would be guessing, hoping, fingers crossed, that we don't have a gender pay gap that much at least.
Yes, probably here in Estonia it's a really difficult problem or difficult question, because for many years we have been leading the EU gender gap top or the list. Yes, but is there a CEO in your company?
So if you look at LinkedIn, then I will say that I'm the CEO. If you look at what we call the company register in Switzerland, where we register our companies, you need to name a managing director. There's no way around it because of legal liabilities and all that. So yes, we do have a name in there. But if you look at our roles, for example, there's no CEO role. If you look at decision-making processes or whatever, there's no CEO who decides this or that. So in that sense, we don't have one in a day-to-day work. We legally have one who would go to jail, yeah. And unfortunately, that's me. So
yeah, somebody has to take the responsibility. Okay, but how do you evaluate performance?
A tricky one as well. Always comes up in our salary process, right? Because there's always that question, how do I set my salary? Does it relate back to performance? Does it not? So we know what's important for the business, of course, and it's always related to the services that we provide, to business development, to sales to a certain extent. And then there's still the parts that we value, whatever you want to call it, internal culture, integration of people, these holistic things as well. So defining performance is difficult. We don't have KPIs on an individual level. So we do have company...
individual level you don't have?
No, okay. we do have company KPIs, of course, and there's the typical things, cash flow, pipeline, the typical things you have to know. On an individual level, we don't. We do measure billable hours, because in a services company, you need to think about these things. So you kind of see that on an individual level, but it's not incentive or bonus related like in many other companies. So we kind of look into it. And then again, it's individual if you take that into account for your salary advice or your salary decisions, or if you don't. So individual performance, almost tension-based as well. I mean, if Siri is always lazy on the sofa at home, and then there might be tensions coming up.
Okay, but how do you avoid chaos? I
asked that myself as well. So sometimes it's probably chaotic in a way. No, but the chaos is avoided by the structure, so by the roles, by our principles, and also by how we structure the work with our clients. Because there's usually a structure that we use there, like series future fit organizations, 4 kind of pillar things, and there's a few steps in the process that we usually take. If you do leadership development, there's usually a few steps that you would take. So there is structure to the work that we are doing, and there's structure in the sense of the roles and responsibilities.
So the procedures are structured, basically.
Correct. And there's a few processes, like, for example, the salary process that I just outlined. That's a, whatever it is, 5-6 step process. So this is the structure that we are having. But I can't tell you if you've kind of performed well in that process or not, because you and I might have different interpretations of what's important in that salary process. So that's part of it.
Okay. Siiri, how to survive in a chaotic environment?
Well, meditate. But in the end, yeah, exactly. Like in the past, we talked in the business world, it's a VUCA world. Now it's already a new term, I think, from a Californian university, which is called BANI. Brittle, anxious, what is a non-linear and incomprehensible. So our world, in a way, in short, is becoming crazier and crazier. And I think the only way to survive is exactly be self-aware, like stay in touch with yourself no matter what is going around you, and prioritize, focus as much as you can, but just not for the next 3 to 5 years. But now it's more about making plans for the next 3 months, perhaps, and just working in a much more flexible way. Yeah.
And I think for both chaotic systems and complex systems, there's always a similar approach. You sense, you probe, and then you respond. So it's kind of an experimental approach. And there's exactly the difference to the more traditional ones, where we think, we sense, we plan, and then we respond. And that's the part where planning doesn't work for chaotic systems and it doesn't work for complex systems. So the probing, the experimentation is the key thing.
And I think there is also like management, like different kind of approaches to management or management philosophies, which actually say that to a certain extent chaos is good for the company, for the teams, and so on. So it's not necessarily a negative thing in that sense. But Timm, what have been the main challenges? You brought out some of the challenges regarding the salary negotiations, but some other.
So one thing, and I think we talked about that as well, in I think it was Q1 2019, we had relatively bad numbers from a business perspective, cash flow red, these kind of things that in a traditional company would also don't look good. So we had that in 2019, more than 2 years ago. And then anyway, I was relatively relaxed because I saw the pipeline and I know that there's also kind of seasonal effects in services companies. So Q1 never is a strong one. Anyway, so it was not great, and yet again I was not too nervous, right? But then all of these numbers were transparent, and the people around me in the team, some of them got really anxious almost, and we had a conversation, whatever, March, April or so, was like, okay, put a number on the table. What do you think? How likely is it that we need to lay off at least one person in the next month, in the next 4 weeks? And I was like, relatively low, maybe 1%, maybe 2%, right? Because there can always be things going wrong. But other people had up to 50%. So they said 50-50, we need to fire somebody in the next 4 weeks. And that's the part where in a traditional company, we didn't talk about that as a management team. We kept it in this small room, basically, which means the anxiety wouldn't have been outside the room. And for us, it was like headless chicken for 4 weeks or 6 weeks or something, which was obviously completely inefficient, obviously not helpful to solve the actual situation. And I was honestly also getting impatient and frustrated because I was thinking, guys, it's not that bad, it's not good, and it's not kind of existential problems there. So that was one of the situations where I really thought, let's just go back to hierarchy. I just don't tell them. I just, go do your stuff kind of situation. But that was the biggest one still emotionally, I think, 2.5 years back. Yeah.
Okay. Can you bring, both of you, some other examples of companies which have been successful at transforming their organizational structure? Siiri?
Well, one example, for example, from Switzerland, Freitag. Freitag or Freitag?
Freitag.
So they are producing like bike bags, really modern ones from truck rims, I believe. So it's also a truly circular business model. And at the same time, they are also fully self-organized. So the whole production, creative teams, they started, I think they even got inspired by a city model, how they got started. But they are now also a couple of 100 people. And it's going well. They also have a bigger purpose, to save the environment, to do something useful with these truck rims, and exactly work in this way, that everyone can pick their 4 to 5 roles, what they are most passionate about, and then every role they might work in different circles, because then similar purposed roles will be combined into circles, which are like otherwise teams, but these are much more cross-functional, and I think we are doing also financially really great.
Okay. Tim, can you bring some other examples?
I think one of the big famous examples from the Netherlands is Burgeoning. They're like 15,000 people roughly, self-organized. Nursery and home and elderly care, basically. So it's a relatively homogeneous business model. But anyway, they've scaled it to 15,000 people without a single boss. So that's quite impressive in itself. And if you look at the headquarters structures, for example, they got like a few financial people there and then a few kind of central coaches. So they have like 60, 70 people in the headquarters, 60 people for 15,000 people out there. If you look at Estonian companies, I don't know the ratio, but I can tell you for like Switzerland and Germany and so on, for 15,000 people, we probably have a few hundred people in headquarters usually, if not 1,000.
Yes,
right?
exactly.
So this is how you see how differently they're able to scale as well. So that's quite impressive, of course, and it's also one of the biggest self-managed companies. So that's why that comes up. I do think there's a few interesting ones if you look at big multinational corporations where you would say it's not completely self-organized, it's not yet there, but many who are taking interesting steps, and obviously ING Bank would come up. There's Haier in China, a white goods company, so they're also manufacturing sites and so on. 90,000 people roughly. If you look at Roche Pharmaceuticals, they're doing a lot for the transformation already in the last 4 or 5 years, and there's quite a few self-managed teams as part of the big multinational. Obviously, it's not the full company self-organized, but I think that's also inspiring to see if you think that these old traditional companies are able to take a few steps, and that you even find self-managed teams in big multinationals.
And even in manufacturing sector, because I guess in the past it was believed, okay, self-management is something, you can easily do in every IT company or tech firm, consultancy, but try to do it in a 90,000 company like we have Michelin, for example, which is pretty famous, where even this kind of self-managed experiment started also bottom up. I guess it was one of their, even HR leads. It's not typical actually to start this kind of transformation even from HR, but they started trying it out in some plants and found out that even, the production workers, they may not have their, PhD, but actually it's so much in it's in human nature that everyone loves to have more freedom to decide how we work, to come up with improvements, and they did some really great work where product quality went better, financials, they basically started outperforming their competitors since they had been doing that.
Yeah, I think in any situation when you have some ownership in the game, then you are more you start thinking about how to improve the processes and how to make things better. What could become obstacles in implementing self-managed culture?
I think there's probably different cases. One, if you start greenfield and you create everything from scratch, then I think it's that we all have history. I've also been working in big pharma, I've been working in traditional consultancy. So the biggest obstacle is the first crisis, you kind of go back to your typical patterns and the things that you learned, obviously, right? So that's then a kind of a self-awareness, consciousness question. I think if you talk about transforming, for example, a multinational company, then there's always that part, the self-management starts as a small cell usually. It's not like you have 100,000 people working self-organized tomorrow. And also there's kind of the organizational immune system kicks in. because you're questioning some management structures, especially senior middle management. You're questioning certain processes. And status of managers is often coming back to, I have information that nobody else has, and I can decide on things that nobody else can decide on. So kind of the immune system kicks in as soon as you start questioning these things. So that's a hurdle, certainly. And then obviously it's also the level of complexity. If you operate like the big pharmaceuticals that we both work for, I mean, they're operating in 100 different countries or more. They're having many different production sites, incredibly complex supply chain, you know. So there's all of these things where self-management doesn't have an answer for it, but then again, no other management system has an answer for it either. Right? So there's that part that kicks in. So there's a ton of these hurdles, and I think the last one, probably the most important one, I think, is ego of people.
Yeah, it can become an obstacle anywhere.
That's true.
Not only on professional life. Okay, Siiri, do you want to add something?
Perhaps briefly to comment on that, because when I became active in this future work field, and I was really reading like tons and tons of books, you know, of course, reinventing organizations, but humanocracy, there is conscious capitalism, there is integral business, and the list goes on. But actually what is behind all these concepts and what's the major difference is really the mindset shift. It's not even so much what is being done differently, but it really starts with where you are as a human being. And what for me, because I'm also truly passionate about leadership development and our human development as such, it's just so fascinating. I mean, I don't know yet if I should say in a positive or negative way, but it's just often that, let's say if some top leaders have gone through some like bad accident, or I think it was the American Aetna insurance company, and their CEO had a ski accident in Switzerland and almost like passed away and hardly survived. But as he started recovering, like his whole mindset changed, and suddenly he also started, you know, thinking, okay, why do we actually exist as a company? And he wanted to do something good for the world and also for the employees, of course, and also started automatically offering a much more autonomy-based operational model. So it seems to be somehow also so much to do with where we are with our own development as leaders and human beings.
Yeah, I've heard other stories as well that near-death experiences have triggered something in people to look things from a different angle. Not something I would recommend, of course. But sometimes you need a certain shake-up in order to see from a different angle. But if there's somebody at the moment who is listening to us and is starting to think that, okay, let's change something in my company as well, where he or she or the company should start? What are the first steps?
I would always recommend go look at what's out there already, because you're probably in the first or early movers space, but you're not the first ones to move. So there's a ton of good examples. As I said before, we have that conference Thiel around the world. That's one source, but obviously there's a ton of other sources where you can really look at the examples of the pioneers who have taken these steps, and you can learn from them. I would never recommend copy-paste, of course. But then again, there's so much experience you can draw from. So, and also what Siiri mentioned before, all of these guys are open to talk about their experiences and happy to share. So you can learn so much from just talking to them, which is also what we did the last 5-6 years. Just talk to as many people as you can who have taken steps and learn from the guys. And then really the other thing that I always say is ask yourself why not instead of why. Because if we start asking ourselves why not, then it becomes much more difficult to say, well, actually, because there's not many reasons against it. And just try it out, go away from these abstract intellectual conversations to just do something tomorrow. You'll find out if it works, and if not, then do something else. And that's kind of this experimental approach that I also said.
Okay, this is interesting. The company I work for is there's around 4,000 people, and our CEO he said something similar in a recent meeting. He said, "Don't think what is not possible. Think what is possible." So the same way. Okay, Siiri, do you want to add something?
Probably just that even though we have seen in bigger companies some bottom-up transformations as well, but normally it is much more, it's more hurdle. Things go slower, so it absolutely helps if you can convince your CEO and your management team. And also, I would say probably the best and most inspiring would be if you even take your CEO and management board with you and go and visit some other self-managed companies. I mean, there are companies in Estonia, in the Baltics, everywhere in Europe. So I would just connect the dots.
Okay. Well, one thing is learning from the others' experiences and seeing what could be a perfect fit for your own company. But when going further from the hearing from other experiences is, for example, flattening the managerial structure one of the first steps that could be taken in this kind of situation?
I think I would always go for kind of co-creating the future operating model and future organizational design, because otherwise if you do that in your management ivory tower again, you kind of paradoxically did the same again, right? So co-create that new structure, and also take into account that this whole thing, how do you create something completely different that you've not been used to? That might be difficult. So it's good to not only get inspiration, but maybe also have somebody kind of professionally facilitating some of these co-creation sessions, always helpful. And also have somebody who challenges you, who's not kind of directly part of your team. And it could be the team next door, right? If they're intrigued by the same ideas, then why not ask them to challenge you?
Like a devil's advocate.
Totally, yeah, totally. And that's by the one of the most fun roles that you and I play, as well as kind of challenge everything that the clients try to do in a way.
Okay. So, Siiri, do you want to?
Yeah, exactly. Practically, it normally goes like this, that the top management would then need to sign something called constitution, or in Timm's company, it's lifeline, to give away this authoritative structure, to set up a clear purpose for the company and set up a self-managed rules. And then companies would typically also really map out what is the value stream in their company, which are the most important roles, which are the most important circles, so to say, the company may need. And then from there, the structure starts actually developing in an evolutionary way, because then in every role, people will see, do I need someone else? Do I need to split my role? And then it's in human body, the cells are also self-organized, and it keeps on evolving. Yeah.
Okay, to wrap up the conversation here, what do you think when self-managed culture becomes mainstream?
I hope sooner rather than later would probably be the answer. I think it will probably not become mainstream in the next decade or something. Okay. And then again, I think what we see become mainstream, for example, is a lot more purpose-driven, kind of ecosystem, sustainability, friendly kind of behavior. And I think these questions will require also a different way of managing companies. So I think it will become more and more kind of accepted. But if you say whatever 2/3 of the companies are operating self-managed, then it's probably not in the next decade, unfortunately.
Okay, Siiri, what are your thoughts on the matter?
Yeah, tough question. I would hope so still, but in the next 10 years. I'm more a positive thinker. But indeed, I have to say that the global pandemic has definitely been an accelerator. And let's see what the world brings, because obviously companies and CEOs are finding it extremely more difficult to navigate if these kind of global events are happening. So.
Yes, actually, when I was preparing for this podcast, I started thinking about the company where I work, and there they very recently, a year or 2 years ago, they also started implementing a new organizational culture, which is based on 3 pillars, which are awareness, responsibility and self-belief. So it's moving towards self-managed organizational structure as well. So it's nice to kind of get like an outsider's view thanks to this podcast to understand that the company is moving to the right direction. But we have to wrap up the conversation here, but this is not the end of the podcast yet. As our regular listeners already know, we like to end each episode with 3 traditional questions, and it won't be any other way in your case. So let's look up at those questions. The first one is, what is the one book about management or leadership that you would recommend to everybody who is interested in this kind of issues or topics? Tim, let's start with you.
Probably not a traditional leadership or management book, but one book that I find quite useful is a book by Adam Grant called Give and Take.
Okay.
And it basically looks into the takers are not the most successful ones, although short-term they are usually. But the most successful, and also interesting enough, the least successful and the most successful group at the same time are the givers. So kind of unconditionally giving. And what is interesting, if you read the book, is you find out what are kind of the ideas why you are in the most successful group of the givers and why you will be in the least successful group of the givers. And all I can say is it will lead you back to self-management leadership to a certain extent. So unconditional giving makes sense if you understand that one twist that Adam Grant describes in the book.
Okay, that's interesting. I want to read that book. You got me curious. Okay, Siiri, what's your recommendation?
I truly loved a book I read a few years ago from Fred Kaufman, who is ex-head of leadership development from Google and LinkedIn. The title was called The Meaning Revolution, and initially I thought, just another book on purpose. But actually it was a truly inspiring book on conscious leadership. So how do you, instead of managing people, how do you lead them inside out? Like how you can empower others and help them to also find out what their purpose is, how to lead actually through, offering more autonomy. And there are just a couple of, there are several examples also of really like difficult business situations. And then he's also explaining the difference, like how you respond from a more, let's say, egocentric point of view of leadership, and how do you respond from more conscious way of leadership. And I remember I even sent him a compliment through LinkedIn that I really enjoyed the book, and he even answered. So
wow.
I appreciated that.
Wonderful. It sounds like a good handbook in that sense, what to do and what not to do. Okay, wonderful. The second question, what is the one piece of advice you would always give on managing teams, leadership, etc.? And Siiri, let's continue with you.
We touched upon it a bit before. I would say live and lead every day like if it would be a last day. Because I truly realized like this is something what makes people come alive. And I've had also in my own experience several like coaching sessions with middle managers or top leaders, and they go in circles and circles and circles with between different options in life. And then you just need to pose a question: what would you do if you would only have 3 or 5 years left to live? And then boom, that's the answer, in a few seconds. So yeah, it has helped me, and I hope it helps others.
That's an interesting angle. I've heard a lot of this think as if today is the first day of the rest of your life. but this is an interesting concept. Okay, Tim, what is your one piece of advice?
I think I really like the Steve Jobs quote, and he said once something along the lines like, you hire the smartest people not to tell them what to do now, right? Because otherwise you could have just hired somebody. And I think that's how I look at leadership as well. If you, I don't think I know everything. I don't think anyone knows everything, obviously. And with the world becoming more complex, you should provide a bit of leadership in the sense of providing that direction, but providing structure for autonomy, as I said before. And I think Steve Jobs obviously put it quite nicely in just that one sentence.
Yes, Steve Jobs has had many good quotes. Sometimes there are several ones which I go back in, in my life as well. Okay, and the last question. What is the one skill, could be related to management and leadership, but could be something else, you feel you still need to work on yourself? And Tim, let's continue with you.
Patience.
Patience.
Sorry, Siri.
Yes, you've mentioned it several times.
I'm
doesn't
totally
come
impatient.
as a surprise.
No, I'm totally impatient, I must say. And it doesn't necessarily always help in all of the leadership situations either. Also that efficiency value that I have combined with patience or the impatience will drive some of my colleagues nuts, and I do know that, so apologies for that from here.
Okay, but it's a work in progress, I understand.
Somehow, yeah. Probably will be for a bit longer.
Okay, thank you, Siiri.
Tim just took the word out of my mouth.
Yeah, I couldn't understand.
You saw my reaction.
Why did you react like that? But now I
because we
understand.
definitely did not coordinate his answers. But I have to, like in my case, maybe more from this angle that I'm like already so used to co-create with other entrepreneurs and leaders like Tim, and these guys are all so enthusiastic about the purpose and changing the world. But from time to time, of course, you still have clients who are maybe not yet there or just come along slower, and then it's really the skill to meet people where they are.
Yes, and take time to walk together with them towards the same direction.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Well, I'm so happy that you had the chance to come to the show. I'm not so happy that we have run out of the time. And this pretty much sums up the discussion this time. So this was our today's episode. Thank you, Siiri. Thank you, Tim. Thank you to all our listeners as well. And until next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This was EBS podcast Satelliit. Listen to our other episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify and YouTube.